E.B. White once said, "There is nothing more likely to start disagreement among people or countries than an agreement." Keep this in mind as we discuss today the Biden administration's decision whether to join in the Iran nuclear deal or not. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
David, here we go again. The Obama-Biden administration in 2015 successfully put a deal together with the Iranians about enrichment of nuclear materials. There were some Americans who really agreed with it, and a lot of other people, especially in the Middle East, who disagreed with it because it did not address really what the core issues are of national security.
Well, that's correct, Russ. I mean, the deal that the Obama administration struck with the Iran regarding the Iran nuclear deal back in 2015, and just for our viewers to know, I'm sure some of our viewers heard of the Iran nuclear deal, but just for those who did not, we're talking about the deal that was struck in 2015 between the P5 and Iran, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, including the US, France, Russia, Britain, and China, in addition to Germany, who was an added member to the negotiations, and Iran, of course. Well, that deal, the United States kind of withdrew from it 2 years ago under former President Trump in 2018. And now the Biden administration are considering rejoining the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, basically to get back to the deal so Iran can get back on the deal as well. But for now, there seems to be some miscommunication between Iran and the United States. Why is that? Because the United States is suggesting that Iran will have to adhere to certain conditions
that were not there in the original agreement.
No, they were not. That will make a horse laugh. Because it was the United States that withdrew from the deal in the first place. So, and this is why I personally, when I heard the statement from the new Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, stating that Iran has to adhere to the conditions, I was like, whoa, what are you talking about? Because now the whole credibility of the Biden administration is in line regarding this. Europeans are already wondering if the Biden administration is going to adhere to what the conditions were back when the deal was struck back in 2015.
Well, they certainly saw the United States withdraw from the deal.
And that's correct. And now the Europeans are wondering, where those conditions coming from?
We know Robert Malley is going to be the envoy to Iran. What do you think of that?
Well, Robert Malley was a figure who played a pivotal role during the first round of negotiations back in 2015. I mean, he is well respected in many different quarters in Washington, D.C. And so the idea that the consideration of Rob Malley as the envoy for the Biden administration would suggest that the Biden administration is serious about re-entering the deal. But at the same time, if you are putting conditions that weren't there in the first place, this will give Iran no incentives for rejoining again. Why would they want to do that?
Well, why would they trust the United States is really the question, given the long history of mistrust and misdeeds.
Well, that's correct. I mean, if we are to look back in history, we have to go back to 1953 with the coup to oust the democratically elected back in Iran, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, and installing the Shah, who was sort of in favor of promoting U.S. interests and so forth. Yes, the Iranians will always harbor that kind of mistrust. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei stated that you cannot trust the Americans. So by doing this, what the Biden administration is doing right now by imposing the conditions, if they want to rejoin, if Iran wants to rejoin the deal, the Iranians, hardliners, going to be saying, see, we told you so. You cannot trust the Americans. But here is one thing, Russ, that even our viewers need to know, is that we always talk about our ends, what's in the West.
Yeah.
We don't think in terms how Iranians are looking at this. Well, what I'm referring to here is that Iran's going to have the presidential elections soon. There are hardliners inside Iran that they don't agree with this deal at all.
Yeah.
So we have to take that into consideration, how that's going to play out on the other end as well. So I am certain that if hardliners win the presidency in Iran, replacing Hassan Rouhani, then you will expect a far hard sort of possession from the Iranians towards the nuclear deal.
And maybe no deal at all.
Which will be problematic.
What's in it for the United States to enter into this deal?
Well, basically what Iran is saying now is just, sure, Iran is stating that we will rejoin the JCPOA under the conditions they were agreed upon in 2015, starting by the first thing, which what the Iranians are asking is for the lifting of sanctions. Even the Europeans, our European allies, are in agreement with this. This saying you can't be imposing more conditions on Iran. Well, because the U.S. Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, was saying that they have violated. Well, wait a minute. How did they end up violating this? It's because we withdrew from the agreement in the first place.
Right.
And it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, we're not defending Iran here, whatever. I mean, it's just what's pragmatic, what's logical. You withdrew from a deal, and now you want to get back to it by imposing other conditions? Who's going to agree to that?
Well, we know that the kind of political turmoil we see in the United States is not, the United States is not alone being the only country that experiences that. And it must be going on in Iran just as well, with the hardliners versus the people currently in power.
And that's correct. You're absolutely correct, Ross. The same, they have it over there as much as we have it here, between Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals. They have the same issues they're dealing with based on their culture and so forth. And the big concern, personally, that I see, knowing what I know about Iran, and I wrote a book about this issue here a couple years ago, is that if a hardliner ascends to power as a president, they're going to have they'll take a different tone, position altogether regarding this deal, which is something I certainly wouldn't want to see.
We take a look at what Israel is facing and what Saudi Arabia is facing with this. What's your opinion of that?
Well, that's an interesting point, Ross, because it is Saudi Arabia and Israel that pushing behind the scenes for not allowing Iran to rejoin the agreement and pushing the U.S. not to do so. And this is what surprised me about, again, the Secretary of State's statements, which tells me one thing. There are some hidden forces either outside the U.S. or inside the U.S. that has pushed the Biden administration into this position, because that just doesn't make any sense in my opinion. So Saudis are, of course, concerned.
Necessarily.
Israel will be concerned, and this is why we've been hearing a lot of rhetoric from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu regarding attacking Iran, which I will not be a smart thing to do. Yes, you Israel, could wipe out Tehran by using nuclear weapons, but Iran could also wipe out Haifa and Tel Aviv, given how Israel is
Which is the heart of Israel.
Yeah.
Israel would cease to exist.
Exactly, Russ, because Israel is so small and dense.
Right.
So it will be easy target for Iran. And I do believe that Iranians will not bluff on this. If they are attacked, if Israel attack Iran, you will expect a barrage of missiles flying into Tel Aviv and Haifa.
If this deal goes through and sanctions are lifted, do you see a dramatic easing of tensions with Iran once their economy is open again?
Well, I am sure it will. It's just the idea of if you want to rejoin the agreement, the JCPOA, you have to rejoin it under the same conditions. And this is where the issue of the Middle East, like the Israel and the Saudis, they have to think in terms of, okay, how are we going to approach this one here? So I can understand that the concerns that some Middle Eastern countries have regarding their security. But I also understand that Iran will not cross the line because they know what the consequences will be.
Severe.
Yeah, they will. Iran, despite what you hear, and again, I'm not defending Iran here, some of the entities within Iran strikes me as pragmatic because they will know what the consequences will be if they cross that line by attacking either one of the U.S. allies in the Middle East or launch some barrage of missiles and so forth. They know what the consequences is. And I argued this point back then when I wrote the book.
Well, let's take a look at the book.
Oh, okay.
We know the author. Matter of fact, the author's with us today. Let me quote from the book directly. Assuming the agreement is a mistake and the United States Congress votes down the deal or authorizes military strikes, Iran will have no choice but to do what Pakistan, India, and North Korea did, develop nuclear weapons in secret. Then Iran would withdraw from being a signatory on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which it signed in 1970, leading to uncertainty, instability, and shifting alliances, to say the least.
That's correct, Ross, and that's where I see it going now with the hardliners in Iran pushing for why bother with this deal in the first place. So, and if it's the case, then they're going to move forward their own way, like what Pakistan did, and India, and North Korea. And I mean, as for Israel, so we all know that Israel has nuclear weapons. It's no secret.
And a lot of them.
Yeah, except that Israel has the policy of not confirming, not denying, sort of approach to that one. So, yeah, that's where I see the challenges. So, it behooves the Biden administration to think about its own credibility and how it's going to proceed, because the Europeans now are really questioning where the Biden administration stands regarding this.
Do you see this being a real major break in terms of confidence in the United States from the European Union and others?
Well, that will be. That will be, because there are a lot of concerns as to which direction this is going to go. Because if Iran decide, okay, we're done with this nuclear deal altogether, and if a hardliner ascends to power, then you will expect a different trajectory for what might come next in the Middle East.
So what we're seeing is a lot of rhetoric from both sides. We're going to be tough. No, we're going to be tougher. How do you see that playing?
It is hard to tell at this point, Ross. I've been thinking or trying to wrap my head around the statements by the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, and I couldn't come up to some sort of a key point where I would say, no, it's going to go this direction or that direction. It's hard to tell at this point. The only thing I am convinced about is that there are behind-the-scene forces that are pushing the Biden administration into this position, whether these forces are these hidden forces are from outside the U.S. or inside the U.S. I don't know.
Well, we know it's probably both.
So that's correct.
Well, for the last 3 weeks, there have been behind-the-scenes negotiations going on. We're not hearing much about them, but we know they're actually happening.
Yeah, there have been some secret talks between the Biden administration and Iran for the last 3 weeks, trying to put the dots on the letter as to how to approach the negotiations. But, that could be just a strategy from each party who's going to sort of batch first, rather. I don't know. I don't know at this point. But the idea that, again, what alarmed me the most was the statement by the Secretary of State that Iran has to sort of abide by certain conditions. Well, if you are rejoining the same agreement under the conditions they were put back in 2015, then it shouldn't be no new conditions per se. Yeah, you can negotiate something new, but that's what I see.
For the people viewing this right now, What would you say is the number one thing for them to pay attention to in this whole scenario?
Well, the one thing to pay attention to is what the political outcome is going to be inside Iran. In other words, will a hardliner ascend to the presidency? Because if it is, then could change the dynamics, the trajectory of the talks altogether. And that in itself will put again the Middle East at the forefront as far as being already a volatile region where major powers are competing over resources and so forth. This will dramatize the whole area.
So this is going to continue to be a focus of virtually the world.
That's correct. That's correct. Even though there are some talks inside Washington that the Biden administration is now trying to shift its interest from the Middle East into
China.
To China.
With good reason.
That's correct.
Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other videos. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
And as always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.